It was a Tuesday, just a quiet, gray, rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, standing over the big copper pot, the one David bought me for our 10th anniversary, stirring the beef stew. It was their favorite. Leo, my eldest stepson, he's 36 now, a grown man with a seat on a board of directors, but he still asks for my rosemary stew every time he visits. Or he used to. I turned the heat down low. The house was so big and so quiet since David passed 3 months ago. Sometimes the silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. But today was going to be different. Today was the family meeting. That's what Leo had called it. He sent a text to the group chat, the one they usually leave me out of. "We're coming over, Alara. We need to discuss the estate logistics. Be there at 4. Logistics, that's Leo. Everything is a transaction. But my heart, oh, my foolish, hopeful heart. I didn't see it that way. I thought they were coming to check on me. I thought finally the grief had brought us back together. I thought maybe Sarah, my middle girl, 34 years old and sharp as a tack, would finally let me hug her without stiffening up. I thought Ben, the baby, though he's 30 now, would sit at the counter and tell me about his life. I wiped my hands on my apron. I reached into the deep front pocket of that apron and felt the crinkle of paper, the document. I patted it, just to make sure it was still there. It was my surprise for them, my gift, my way of saying, I don't want David's money, I just want to be your mother. If I had known what was happening in the dining room at that exact moment, I would have taken that paper and burned it on the stove right then and there. But I didn't know, not yet. I picked up the ceramic serving bowl. It was heavy, beautifully glazed, a deep ocean blue. It was steaming hot, filled to the brim with the stew. I grabbed a kitchen towel to hold the sides, because the heat was radiating right through the ceramic. I walked out of the kitchen, through the butler's pantry, toward the dining room. I was smiling. I was actually smiling. I was imagining the look on their faces when I told them the news. The dining room door was slightly ajar. Just a crack. I was about to push it open with my hip when I heard it. The voice. It was Leo. Low. Baritone. Impatient. "We can't just dump her on the street, Leo. People will talk." I froze. My hip was an inch from the wood. The ceramic bowl was burning my palms through the towel, but I didn't put it down. I couldn't move. That was Ben's voice. The youngest. He sounded nervous. Then Sarah spoke, and her voice. It wasn't the voice of the little girl I used to braid hair for. It was cold. It was steel. "Not the street, Ben. Stop being dramatic," Sarah said. I could hear the clink of glass. She was pouring herself a drink from David's crystal decanter. "We found a facility. It's cheap. It's about 2 hours north, and honestly, it's fine. It's got a bed and a window." A facility. My breath caught in my throat. A facility? 2 hours north? "She's lived here for 30 years, Ben mumbled. "This is her home." "This is a $20 million asset," Leo snapped. The anger in his voice made me flinch. "And right now, it's sitting occupied by a woman who has 0 blood relation to us. Look, Ben, use your head. She's 62. She's not going to live forever. But if we don't move now, she takes it all. Dad's will was a mess. If we let her stay, she establishes residency rights that could tie this property up for another decade. Do you want to wait until you're 40 to see a dime of Dad's money?" "She raised us, Leo," Ben said, but his voice was weak. It was the voice of a man who was already losing the argument. "She was the help," Sarah cut in. "Let's be real. She was a glorified nanny who got a ring. Dad was lonely. She was there. That's the history. Don't rewrite it just because she makes good stew." I stood there, and I felt my heart stop in my chest. I need to pause right here, just for a second. Because I know there is someone watching this right now who knows exactly what that coldness feels like. You gave them everything. You cooked the meals. You bandaged the knees. You sat up late when they were sick. And then, the moment they think you aren't listening, they reduce you to a burden, to a glorified nanny. If you have ever been betrayed by the very people you fed with your own hands, I need you to press that subscribe button right now. Do it for Elara. Do it for yourself, because you need to hear how this ends. You need to see that sometimes the quietest people hold the biggest storms. I stared at the crack in the door. The heavy ceramic bowl was starting to make my arms shake. Or maybe it was the rage. "So, what's the timeline?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow," Leo said. "The lawyer is coming at 10 a.m. We sit her down. We sugarcoat it. We tell her the house is too big, too much work for a fragile old woman." I heard a lighter flick. Leo was smoking in the house. David never allowed smoking in the house. "We tell her we want her closer to the city for her health," Leo continued, exhaling. "We tell her the facility is a luxury community. We get her to sign the power of attorney and the quitclaim deed for the house. Once she signs, we have the movers here by noon." "You already called movers?" Ben asked. "Packed her bags myself," Sarah laughed. A cruel, sharp sound. "They're in the mudroom. 2 suitcases. That's all she needs. The rest goes to the estate auction next week." 2 suitcases. 30 years of life. 30 years of Christmas mornings, of birthday parties, of nursing David through cancer, of holding this family together with nothing but duct tape and love. Packed into 2 suitcases in the mudroom. My hand brushed against my apron pocket again. The paper crinkled. The twist. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and fast. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They didn't know. They had no idea what I was carrying in this pocket. Inside my apron was a document drawn up by my own attorney just 3 days ago. It was a deed of gift. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and fast. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They didn't know. They had no idea what I was carrying in this pocket. Inside my apron was a document drawn up by my own attorney just 3 days ago. It was a deed of gift. "She won't," Leo said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She's weak, Ben. She's always been a pushover. She just wants us to like her. She'll sign anything if we smile at her and call her Mom. Watch. Tomorrow, she'll sign her life away and thank us for the pen. She'll thank us for the pen." That was the moment. That was the moment the grandmother died, and something else was born. I looked down at the stew. It was cooling now. A film was forming on the top. I didn't kick the door open. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the ceramic bowl against the wall, even though every fiber of my being wanted to shatter it into a million pieces, just like they had shattered my heart. No. I turned around. I walked softly, silently, back through the butler's pantry. I walked back into the kitchen. My hands were trembling as I set the heavy blue bowl back onto the counter. Clink. I took the kitchen towel and folded it neatly. I placed it next to the stove. I looked out the window at the gray, relentless rain. Leo was right about one thing. David's will was a mess, or at least the one they knew about was. But Leo was wrong about me. I wasn't weak. You don't survive a childhood like mine by being weak. You don't survive a marriage to a man as powerful and difficult as David by being a pushover. I had just chosen to be soft. I had chosen to be kind. But I could choose something else. I reached for the phone on the wall, the old landline that David kept because he didn't trust cell signals in the storm. I knew what I had to do. They thought they were walking into an eviction meeting tomorrow. They thought they were going to ambush a confused old lady. They didn't know I was about to make a phone call to a guest they hadn't seen in 10 years. A man who knew where all the bodies were buried. I lifted the receiver. I dialed the number. It rang once. Twice. "Hello?" A gruff voice answered. "Bill," I said, my voice steady, cold as the rain outside. "It's Elara. I need you to come tomorrow and bring the briefcase, the other briefcase." When he walked through that door tomorrow, everything would flip. The next morning felt strange, too quiet. I woke before dawn. I made myself a cup of tea, black, the kind David used to drink, the kind that settles the nerves before a storm. The house felt like a museum, beautiful, valuable, and empty of love. I found the suitcases in the mudroom, 2 cheap nylon bags shoved against the wall next to David's old golf clubs. Sarah had packed them, Leo had confirmed. My entire history in this house, the photos, the letters, the little trinkets I collected with David, reduced to 2 nylon bags. That was the last piece of proof I needed. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. I made sure I looked frail. I put on a gentle, slightly confused expression. I chose a cardigan that felt soft and old. It was a performance, dear one. And I had to give the performance of my life. The clock struck 10. Leo, 36, Sarah, 34, and Ben, 30, arrived precisely on time. They didn't even bother with the front door. They came in through the mudroom entrance, right past my entire life packed into those bags. They were all dressed for business, dark suits, shark smiles. They had even brought their own lawyer, a thin man with a nervous tie named Mr. Davies. They ushered me straight into the massive living room, the one with the vaulted ceilings and the view of the lake. It was freezing in there. "There you are, Elara," Leo said, his voice entirely too warm. He patted my shoulder, a gesture he hadn't made since he was 8. "We're just here to finalize the logistics." "Logistics," I repeated faintly. "Oh dear. I don't understand these things." They sat me down in David's heavy leather armchair. They arranged themselves opposite me, like judges. Mr. Davies opened a huge, official-looking portfolio on the glass coffee table. "This is really for your own good, Mom," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false concern. She even called me Mom. I almost choked on the irony. "This house is just too much for you," Leo continued, leaning in conspiratorially. "It's too large for one woman, too far from the city, too much maintenance. We don't want you alone out here." They pitched the retirement facility like it was a 5-star resort. They used words like community, wellness, and managed living. "We found a lovely place," Sarah interjected, pointing to a brochure with a smiling woman in a tennis skirt. "It's small, cozy. It will be so much easier for us to visit you closer to the city." They were lying right through their teeth. They just wanted me to sign over the title to the $20 million property so they could cash out by the weekend. They wanted me out, quiet and gone. Mr. Davies pushed a pen and 2 heavy documents toward me. "If you just sign here, Elara," the lawyer said, his voice flat and professional. "This is the power of attorney, and this releases your life estate claim to the residence. It's a formality." I looked at the pen. It was a cheap ballpoint. They couldn't even bother to use a nice pen to sign away 30 years of my life. I picked it up. My hand trembled slightly, but not from fear, from the sheer white-hot fury of holding back the truth. I looked at Leo, then Sarah, then Ben, who couldn't quite meet my eyes. He looked sick. Good. He should. I lowered the pen toward the paper. Leo leaned forward, a greedy anticipation in his eyes. I stopped. I didn't sign. I looked at the 3 grown people who believed I was nothing more than a senile obstacle. "I'm not signing that," I said, my voice soft but steady. Leo's smile faltered. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Don't be difficult, Elara," Leo hissed under his breath. I placed the pen down. I looked him straight in his calculating eyes. "I'm not signing that," I repeated. "But he might." Leo was about to explode. He opened his mouth to shout, to drop the act and reveal the true snake inside. But then we all heard it. The sharp, clear chime of the front door echoed through the large, quiet house. Ding-dong. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard all morning. All 3 of their heads snapped toward the hall. Leo looked furious. "Who the hell is that? We told the staff no interruptions." "It's not staff, Leo," I said, rising slowly from the armchair. My knees didn't shake. My resolve was iron. "It's a guest, and when he walked through that door, everything would flip." Leo glared at me. "You invited someone? Who?" I simply watched the hall. The butler was already moving to answer. A moment later, a familiar, deep, rumbling voice filled the vast, cold space. "Leo! Sarah! Ben! Didn't think you kids would be here so early. Hope I didn't miss the coffee." The 3 children, suddenly frozen in their seats, heard that voice. They recognized the familiar, booming friendliness. They didn't know the depth of the man who stood in the hall, only the face he wore on holidays. I finally saw him walk through the living room entrance. It was Bill. Uncle Bill. Their faces went slack with shock. They had always known him as David's closest friend, their Uncle Bill, who brought cheap gifts on Christmas. They had no idea who he really was. They didn't know the power he held. He stood there, impeccably dressed, holding a large, worn leather briefcase. The other briefcase, and Leo, the smartest of them all, was the first to realize that the pleasant, smiling man in the doorway wasn't there for coffee. The silence in the room was heavy, thick with the smell of expensive cologne and fear. Leo recovered first. He had to. He was the eldest. "Uncle Bill," Leo said, forcing a cheerful mask back onto his face. "What a surprise. I thought you were in Singapore. Is this a social call? We're just having a brief private family meeting with Mr. Davies here." He gave me a sharp look that meant, "Get rid of him." Bill, my Bill, smiled gently. He was always so kind, so unassuming. That was David's brilliance. He chose the unassuming ones to handle his most powerful business. Bill didn't look like an executor of a massive estate. He looked like the fun uncle. "Oh, I know what this is about, Leo," Bill said, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table. He set the briefcase down, and the snap of the latch echoed like a gunshot. "I flew in this morning. Elara asked me to attend. Please, carry on. Leo's composure shattered. Elara invited you? Why? I gently waved Mr. Davies, their slick, nervous lawyer, toward the door. You can go now, Mr. Davies. Your services are no longer required. Bill handles our family affairs now. Mr. Davies looked desperately at Leo, who was already stammering. We haven't signed anything. You can't just... I haven't signed a thing, I confirmed softly. So you can leave. The lawyer, smelling a massive professional train wreck, quickly gathered his portfolio and fled. Leo, Sarah, and Ben were left exposed, facing me, facing Bill, and facing the truth. I stood up. The fragile old lady act, the meek widow who was just a glorified nanny, was over. You want to talk logistics? I asked. My voice didn't waver. Let's talk truth. I looked at my 3 children, 36, 34, and 30 years old. I was only 29 when I met your father, I began, and the silence in the room was absolute. I grew up in a broken home. My father was drunk half the time. We didn't have money, but worse than that, we didn't have stability. I never really had a home. When I married David, all I wanted was 2 things: him and a home I could anchor myself to, and children. Oh, how I longed for children. My voice hitched, a genuine, painful catch. But I couldn't have them. Then I walked into this house, and the next day, I had to be a mother. I had to instantly become the nurturing, stable, loving presence you needed. It was difficult, yes. I made mistakes, but I did it wholeheartedly. I poured my blood and my sweat into this home, into you, because I loved David and I loved you. Sarah rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes. Okay, great, Elara. We know the history. Can we wrap this up? We have flights to catch. Her impatience, her utter contempt for my feelings. That was the last turn of the knife. No, we are not wrapping this up, Sarah, I said, my voice rising slightly, cutting through her impatience. You see, your father was great at 2 things. 1, he knew how to make money. 2, he knew how to read people. I looked straight at Leo, who suddenly looked pale beneath his expensive tan. I loved your father deeply, I continued. But there was one thing we fought about, loudly and often, and that was you 3. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part, the validation of my late husband's cruelty, which was really his foresight. He used to warn me, I whispered. He would sit right here, in this chair, and he would tell me that once he was gone, you would leave me on the road. He said that once the money was within reach, you would turn on me. He warned me that you are snakes. I paused, letting the words sink into the velvet upholstery and the cold air. I absolutely hated it, I confessed, tears finally, slowly, tracking paths down my cheeks. We had terrible, ugly fights, David and I. I would scream, "How dare you say that about your own children, our children?" And he would just chuckle. He would chuckle and say, "You're cursed with a mother's heart, Elara. But I know them. Just wait. They will show you their scales." I looked at the 3 of them, 36, 34, and 30 years old. None of them could deny it. The scales were showing now. I didn't believe him. I fought him for 30 years because I believed in the love I had given you. I believed my love would protect you from your own greed. Ben whimpered slightly, But Leo quickly put a restraining hand on his arm. "This is emotional blackmail, Elara," Leo declared, trying to reclaim control. "We are talking about legality. We are talking about the will." I cut him off. My hand went into my apron pocket. "Oh, we are wrapping it up, Leo," I said, pulling out the crinkled document. It was folded neatly, ready for a signature that would never come. "You are absolutely right. We are the will." I held the paper up between my thumb and forefinger. It looked so fragile, so insignificant. "I was ready to give you everything," I said, my voice cold with finality. "This paper, right here? This would have made you rich beyond your current imagination. This was my act of faith. My final love letter to the family I thought I built." I looked directly at Sarah, whose eyes were fixated on the paper, suddenly realizing the magnitude of what they had risked. "Watch closely," I said, my voice now loud and clear, ringing through the vaulted space, "because you just cost yourselves $50 million. They thought I was bluffing. They didn't realize the paper in my hand was the only thing standing between them and absolute ruin. But what they did next, Leo's scream, was the final confirmation that my husband had been right all along. I held the paper up, watching the light from the massive window catch the fine watermark. I could see Sarah's eyes track it, greedy and calculating, even in her shock. Ben had covered his mouth. Leo was paralyzed by the realization of the fortune he had nearly secured, and now lost. "This document," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it felt louder than any scream. "This was my deed of gift. It was a transfer of assets, signed, notarized, and ready to be executed this morning. David left me in charge of almost everything. I was going to sign it all over to you, the businesses, the properties, the entire liquidity fund, every penny. I was going to give it all away, no strings attached. I wanted to keep only enough for that small cottage, just a small home where I could still cook their meals and wait for my grandchildren to visit." "Why?" Sarah whispered, her voice tight with disbelief and dawning horror. "Because I don't care about the money." The sudden shout cracked the veneer of the room, vibrating the crystal on the nearby shelf. "I didn't want the estate. I didn't want the businesses. I only wanted the one thing I never had," I pleaded, the last of my mother's heart breaking through the dam. "I wanted a family. I wanted a home where the people who ate my stew actually loved me. I was willing to buy that love with the entirety of your father's fortune." I looked at the crumpled suitcases by the mudroom door, and then back to the precious paper in my hand. The weight of David's prophecy settled, cold and final. "And you were planning to sign my life away and toss me in an institution. You were planning to reduce 30 years of devotion to 2 cheap nylon bags." I took a deep, shaky breath, and then the love was gone, replaced by a cold, righteous certainty. "Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for showing me your scales before I made the biggest mistake of my life." I raised the document high above my head, and I tore it. The sound was terrible in the silent, expensive room. A long, violent rip, followed by the smaller, faster tears, as I shredded the deed of gift into confetti. I threw the pieces, the paper that represented their millions, at Leo's feet. "Puff and dust," I whispered, watching the white fragments scatter across the oriental rug. "It's all just puff and dust to me now." Leo, the 36-year-old CEO, lost his mind. "You crazy old witch!" he roared, lunging forward and scrambling desperately on his hands and knees, trying to gather the pieces. "You can't do that. That's $50 million. You're insane. You'll be penniless. We'll tie you up in court for this." Sarah was pale, staring at the shredded paper, tears of pure greed pooling in her eyes. Ben just collapsed back onto the sofa, his face buried in his hands. I stood there, a widow surrounded by the ruins of her life and the ruins of their future. Then, Bill spoke. His voice was calm, firm, and authoritative, slicing through Leo's hysterical sobs. "Actually, Leo," Bill said, leaning forward and resting his hands on his briefcase, "she can, and you will not tie her up in court." Leo slowly looked up, his face red and wet, the shred of paper dangling uselessly from his hand. She was legally entitled to void that transfer at any point before execution. She did not sign the power of attorney. She owns everything your father entrusted her with. Bill's gaze was hard, moving from Leo's ruined face to Sarah's horrified mask. "And since she just voided the transfer, we revert to the ironclad will David left in my safe," Bill stated, his voice final. He tapped the worn leather briefcase with his knuckle. "You're going to need to sit back down, Leo," Bill continued, his voice softening, but only slightly. "Because that was the transfer Elara chose to make. Now, we're dealing with the will your father chose to leave." Bill reached down, snapped open the latch on the briefcase, and pulled out a thick, ring-bound document. It was stamped with the seal of a major international firm, not Mr. Davies' local practice. "I told Elara she was cursed with a mother's heart," Bill said, looking at the children with a mixture of pity and disgust. "But David was prepared for this. He wrote the ultimate protection. And trust me, children, you're not going to like page 4. They thought they knew their father's legacy. They thought they understood wealth. But the will Bill held wasn't just a document. It was a final, damning judgment on their character. And the contents of page 4 were about to ensure that David's children would never touch the only thing they ever truly loved. Bill cleared his throat. He didn't look at Leo's tear-streaked face or Sarah's rigid, defeated posture. He simply looked at the document in his hands. He was no longer Uncle Bill. He was the executor. As Elara has voided the proposed deed of gift, the assets revert entirely to the terms of the last will and testament of David Arthur Thorne, dated 10 months ago and executed by the International Trust of Geneva. This document is ironclad. The use of International Trust of Geneva was the first real indicator that the legal depth of this document far surpassed anything they had anticipated. This wasn't a local lawyer's paperwork. It was a global, unassailable fortress of law. "Section 4, page 4, Bill began, his voice flat. "To the adult children of the testator, Leo Thorne, Sarah Thorne, and Benjamin Thorne, the testator acknowledges the love held for them in their formative years. However, due to the expressed concerns regarding their financial acuity and commitment to the family unit, the testator has limited their inheritance." Leo hissed, but Bill continued, unrelenting. "Leo Thorne receives the Montana Fishing Lodge and its associated 5 acres, valued at nominal liquidity. Sarah Thorne receives the testator's personal collection of antique watches and the contents of a long-dormant savings account, approximately $90,000. Benjamin Thorne receives the small commercial property in upstate New York, which holds no current tenants and requires significant capital investment. Small parcels of land, a closed-up commercial property, less than $100,000 in cash. After shredding a chance at $50 million, they received nothing more than pocket lint. The silence was deafening. "And the house?" Sarah finally asked, her voice cracking with fury. "The $20 million estate? The one you are currently sitting in?" Bill looked directly at me. The marital home, the primary residence located here in Westchester, is established as a life estate trust, with Elara Thorne as the sole and continuous tenant until her death. The property may not be sold or encumbered. Upon her passing, the proceeds of the sale of the residence are to be transferred in their entirety to the Thorne Foundation's charitable trusts. They would never get the house they were planning to sell next week, the house they were planning to use as leverage to kick me out. That home was secured. But the final blow, the one that would truly show them the depths of their father's preparation, was yet to come. It was the judgment that used my own heart against them. The testator was concerned that, while the children may falter, the grandchildren must not suffer for the sins of their parents, Bill continued, turning the page. Therefore, a conditional educational trust has been established for the 5 grandchildren. 5 grandchildren, my greatest joy. The fund is robust enough to cover the entirety of their private schooling and 4 years of college tuition, including housing and books. The funds are non-negotiable, non-transferable, and cannot be accessed by the parents, Leo, Sarah, or Benjamin. A look of immense relief washed over Sarah's face. At least her children were safe. She had something left, but Bill was not finished. The operative condition for the release of these funds is as follows. The beneficiaries, the grandchildren, must successfully fulfill mandatory grandmother visitation requirements. Specifically, they must spend a minimum of 3 weeks unsupervised every summer holiday with Elara Thorne. Documentation of these visits, signed by Elara Thorne, is required yearly for the funds to be released. Sarah gasped. Leo stared blankly. The irony was savage. To get their children an education, they would have to actively, yearly, force their children to spend the summer with the crazy old witch they tried to toss into a facility. It was the ultimate, continuous humiliation. "Your father used your own children as my security," I whispered, watching them realize their fate. "He knew that unlike you, my grandchildren do love me." Bill closed the book on the grandchildren's claws and looked up, his expression finally showing a touch of satisfaction. Finally, the remainder of the estate, the global businesses, the controlling stakes in the Thorne conglomerate, and the entirety of the liquidity funds, valued in the tens of millions, is allocated to the following entities. He paused, letting the weight of the amount hang in the air. The primary beneficiaries of the bulk of the Thorne estate are the 3 global charitable institutions established by David Thorne and supported by Elara Thorne: the Thorne Children's Orphanage in the United States, the Kivu Refugee School in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Pakistan Women's Educational Trust. I felt a profound sense of peace. The greedy children got nothing, but David's true legacy, compassion and opportunity for the forgotten, would live on. I had just traded a lifetime of sorrow for a moral victory, but there was one last thing I had to say to the men and women who had broken my heart. And that reflection, dear one, is what gives this tragedy its final wisdom. The vast living room was absolutely still. Bill closed his ring-bound document with a sharp thud. The sound echoed the finality of the judgment. Leo, Sarah, and Ben were motionless, paralyzed by the sheer scope of the loss. Not just the loss of the money, but the chilling realization that their father had predicted their betrayal and planned around it. It wasn't just a financial blow, it was a character assassination delivered from the grave. Sarah was the first to move, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. "This is an insult," she spat, her face twisted with bitter rage. "We will fight this, Elara. We will spend every penny of that $90,000 proving undue influence, proving you manipulated him." I looked at her, and my heart felt nothing but a deep, sorrowful pity. The fire was gone. There was only ash. "You've already proven undue influence, Sarah," I said softly. "You proved it yesterday when you called my love temporary caretaking. You proved it today when you threw the gift of $50 million onto the floor because you assumed I was too weak to fight for my own dignity." I turned my gaze to Leo, still sitting slumped in the armchair. "I only ever wanted one thing, Leo, a home. And I wanted you in it. I have no interest in your father's businesses or his estates. I only wanted the joy of watching you come over, of hearing your children laugh in the halls, of building the future I was denied as a girl." I wiped a single final tear away. "But your father was right. He said you would show your scales. And now, I mourn you. Not the children you were, but the adults you chose to become. I lost a husband, but you three." I paused, letting the silence draw out the judgment. "You have lost your mother, your inheritance, and your own father's final respect." Bill stood up, gathering his papers. "The terms of the will are non-negotiable. I advise you to accept the nominal bequests and focus your energy on securing the college funds for your children." He gave them a significant, pointed look. "The mandatory visits are not optional." He nodded to me. "Elara, I'll take the will to the trust office now. I think you need some time alone." And then, one by one, the 3 grown-up children had to leave. They stood up, stiff and defeated. Leo couldn't look at me. Sarah walked toward the mudroom, stopped, and stared at the 2 cheap suitcases. She was forced to confront the sight of the 2 bags she had packed for my humiliation, and she realized they had ultimately packed nothing for themselves. They walked out the door, away from the $20 million house they would never own, toward the futures they had purchased with their own greed. I heard the heavy oak door click shut. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of peace. I walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and the sun was trying to peek through the heavy clouds. "You know, dear one, I may not have $50 million in cash, but I have this house, and it is finally, truly my home. The money David made will now go to building orphanages for children who have nothing, children who need a home and a mother's protection. That is a legacy David and I created together, and it's beautiful. They tried to bury me. They tried to tell me my love was worthless. But I got the house. I got the moral clarity, and I got my grandchildren for 3 weeks every summer. I am cursed with a mother's heart, yes, but that curse is also my strength. It ensured that while they were left with puff and dust, I was left with the only thing that matters, the truth and the hope of tomorrow. They thought they could trade love for money. I proved them wrong. They tried to send me to a facility, but I sent their inheritance to children who actually need one. Could you have forgiven them, knowing what they planned? Or would you have ripped that paper too? Tell me in the comments below. Before you sign away, subscribe to my channel because tomorrow's story is even better than this one and you don't want to miss out.